Most people think the first real financial milestone is becoming a millionaire. It is not. Long before that, there's a number that quietly changes the way you think, the way you breathe, the way you react to bad news, and the way you make decisions when nobody is watching. That number is $50,000. And what makes it so important is that almost nobody talks honestly about what happens when you reach it. Because the moment you cross that line, something strange begins. Your life may not look dramatically different from the outside, but inside, your relationship with money starts to split in two. One version of you feels safer, stronger, more disciplined, more capable. The other version gets tempted, distracted, overconfident, and suddenly vulnerable in ways you were not before. And if you do not understand this shift, $50,000 can become either the foundation of real wealth or the beginning of years of stagnation. Here is the truth most people miss. The first time you hit 10,000, it feels exciting. The first time you hit 20,000, it feels serious. But the first time you hit 50,000, it starts to feel real. Not rich, not free, but real. Real enough that your decisions begin to matter more than your effort. Real enough that one smart move can accelerate your future, and one careless move can quietly erase years of discipline. Up to a point, building money feels like pushing a broken car uphill. Slow, frustrating, exhausting. But around 50,000, if you have built it the right way, you begin to feel something new. Momentum, not full financial freedom, not even close, but enough momentum to finally see how wealth actually grows. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. That is why this milestone matters so much more than people think. Because 50,000 is not just a number in an account. It is a psychological threshold. It is the point where money stops being only about survival and starts becoming about strategy. It is where patience gets tested, identity gets tested, and your habits become visible in a way they never were when the number was smaller. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what starts happening when you reach $50,000. Why some people build from there much faster than expected while others slide backward, and what you need to do if you want that number to become your launch pad instead of your peak. Before we go deeper, think about what $50,000 means to you emotionally. Does it feel impossible? Does it feel small? Does it feel like safety? Does it feel like freedom? Does it feel like an amount you would be terrified to lose? Because your answer matters more than you think. The hidden story you tell yourself about that number will shape what you do when you finally reach it. Some people hit 50,000 and become calmer. Others hit it and immediately start looking for ways to prove they're no longer broke. Same number, completely different future. The biggest mistake people make is believing that the hard part is getting to 50,000. That is hard, yes. But in some ways, the more dangerous moment is after you arrive. Because when you're struggling financially, your mistakes are obvious. Overspending hurts immediately. That shows up loudly. Missed bills create instant pain. But when you build a financial cushion, your mistakes become quieter. Easier to justify. Easier to hide inside words like reward, upgrade, opportunity, or I deserve this. And that is exactly why people who spent years being disciplined can still sabotage themselves right after reaching a major milestone. Think about how money usually feels in the beginning. Every paycheck has a job. Every expense feels personal. Every $100 matters. But when your savings or investments hit 50,000, something subtle changes. You begin to feel less fragile. That is good. You should feel less fragile. But if you're not careful, that healthy relief can slowly mutate into financial looseness. Suddenly, that expensive trip feels more reasonable. That nicer car feels more justified. That impulse purchase feels less dangerous. The emergency does not feel immediate anymore, so your standards quietly soften. And this is where the real problem begins. Most people do not lose momentum because they become reckless overnight. They lose it because they become slightly less intentional. They stop asking the hard questions. They stop measuring decisions against long-term goals. They stop protecting the gap between what they earn and what they spend. They tell themselves their spending is still under control because technically it is affordable. But affordable and aligned are not the same thing. And that difference is where wealth either compounds or leaks away. The truth is, $50,000 creates a weird illusion. It is enough to feel meaningful, but not enough to protect you from repeated bad choices. It is enough to reduce panic, but not enough to remove consequences. It is enough to make you feel more powerful, but not enough to make you financially untouchable. That is why this number is so revealing, because it exposes whether you are building wealth habits or just surviving long enough to accumulate cash. Some people reach 50,000 and assume they are finally allowed to relax. Others reach 50,000 and realize they have only now earned the right to become even more focused. That second group is the group that changes their life, because they understand that the value of 50,000 is not in what it buys. It is in what it teaches. It teaches that progress is real. It teaches that delayed gratification actually works. It teaches that financial discipline is not punishment. It is leverage. Before I show you what that movement really looks like, write this in the comments. The one money habit, financial promise, or savings goal you want to improve next. Keep it simple and honest. Maybe it is, I will stop impulse spending. Maybe it is, I will build my emergency fund. Maybe it is, I will invest every month no matter what. Putting it into words matters. When you write something down, it stops floating around as a vague intention and starts becoming a concrete commitment. Now let's talk about what actually starts happening once you reach 50,000, because this is where the shift becomes real. The first thing that happens is not external. It is internal. You begin to feel a reduction in financial noise. Financial noise is that constant mental static in the background of life. The low-grade anxiety when your phone lights up. The subtle fear of one unexpected expense throwing off your month. Even if you're functioning, that noise consumes energy. But when you build a real cushion, part of that noise fades. Not all of it, but enough that your brain gets some breathing room back. That matters far more than people realize. Because money is not only about math. It is about mental bandwidth. When you are constantly under financial pressure, you make decisions from a narrower mental state. You focus on immediate relief. You prioritize short-term certainty. But with 50,000 behind you, something important happens. You start thinking with a longer timeline. You stop reacting to every inconvenience like a crisis. And that shift in time horizon changes almost everything. This is why reaching 50,000 often makes people feel more mature financially, even if their income has not changed much. The number itself does not magically increase wisdom. What it does is create enough distance from constant urgency that wisdom becomes easier to practice. You can finally say no to bad options without feeling trapped. You can think about opportunity cost instead of just affordability. You can ask better questions. Not can I buy this, but what is buying this delay? Not can I handle the payment, but what would this money become if I left it alone? And that question is one of the most powerful questions in personal finance. What would this money become if I left it alone? Because at 50,000, the answer starts becoming emotionally meaningful. At that level, even moderate returns begin to look like something. A good year can produce gains that feel noticeable. A few steady years can produce growth that starts to surprise you. Not because you got lucky, but because the base got bigger. And once the base gets bigger, time becomes more valuable than effort alone. That realization is powerful. You begin to understand why patient investors sound almost boring when they talk. You understand why consistent contributions matter so much more than dramatic moves. Because for the first time, you can see the machine working. You can see money adding to money without your direct labor being involved in every single dollar. And when that finally clicks, something important happens. You stop seeing saving and investing as deprivation. You start seeing them as ownership of future freedom. But here is the twist. This same realization can also create a new kind of impatience. Once people see the possibility of compounding, many of them suddenly want to speed it up. They become vulnerable to shortcuts. They get seduced by aggressive bets, speculative hype, and the fantasy of turning 50,000 into 100,000 overnight. They think they are being ambitious, but often they're just reacting emotionally to the first taste of momentum. This is one of the most dangerous moments in the journey because the desire to accelerate can destroy the very thing that made growth possible in the first place: consistency. That is why one of the biggest things that starts happening at 50,000 is this: your temperament matters more than ever. Not your intelligence, not your income, your temperament, your ability to stay calm when the market moves, your ability to avoid upgrading your life every time your net worth improves. Your ability to remain boring while the world rewards drama. Your ability to keep doing what works after it stops feeling exciting. That is the hidden skill that separates people who turn 50,000 into real wealth from people who keep restarting. At 50,000, you also start noticing that your financial life is less about big moments and more about invisible patterns. Before, it might have felt like one major event would change everything: a raise, a debt payoff, a bonus. But after this milestone, the game becomes more repetitive and more revealing. What changes your future is not one dramatic move. It is the ongoing behavior you return to when nobody is celebrating you. Do you still automate savings? Do you still control lifestyle creep? Do you still invest during boring months? Do you still resist the urge to financially perform for other people? That last part matters a lot, because once you reach a visible milestone, there is often a quiet pressure to act like it. You start wondering whether your life should look different now, whether you should travel a little more, upgrade a little faster, loosen up a little because you have earned it. And of course, enjoying your money is not wrong. The problem is when enjoyment becomes proof, when spending becomes a way to confirm to yourself that your progress is real. That is a trap, because real wealth does not need constant visual validation. In fact, one of the clearest signs that someone truly understands the $50,000 stage is that they become less interested in looking ahead of their peers and more interested in staying ahead of their own bad habits. They stop using money to perform status and start using money to buy resilience. They care less about appearing successful and more about becoming financially hard to kill. That is what this milestone can start creating if you handle it right. Not luxury, not social proof. Resilience, optionality, recovery speed, emotional stability. Imagine two people with the exact same income. One has almost no savings and lots of invisible pressure. The other has 50,000 in a combination of emergency savings and investments. On paper, they might look similar. In real life, they are not living the same experience at all. One bad month hits them differently. One job loss affects them differently. One surprise bill feels different. One toxic boss feels different. The second person may not be rich, but they have something priceless: room. Room to think, room to move, room to recover, room to choose. And that room is one of the first true luxuries money can buy. This is where finance stops being purely numerical and becomes deeply personal. Because what most people want from money is not really money. What they want is what money changes in the nervous system: less fear, less shame, less vulnerability. They want to stop feeling one mistake away from chaos. 50,000 does not solve every version of that problem, but it often marks the first point where a person can say, maybe for the first time, I am not standing at the edge anymore. Now, there's another thing that starts happening at this level, and this one surprises people. Your standards start rising. Not only your spending standards, but your standards for what counts as a worthwhile financial move. When you have very little money, saving a few dollars here and there feels urgent. At 50,000, you start seeing the bigger leaks. You realize that one expensive recurring habit can quietly undo dozens of small frugal wins. You realize that a bad car decision, a housing stretch, or chronic subscription creep matters more than skipping coffee ever will. You begin to think in terms of systems instead of hacks. That is a major evolution, because the internet is full of financial advice that makes people obsess over tiny savings while ignoring large structural choices. But once you build a real base, you start understanding leverage differently. A better salary negotiation matters. Your burn rate matters. The quality of your fixed expenses matters. Your ability to preserve a large monthly surplus matters. And suddenly your financial intelligence becomes less performative and more strategic. And since we are in the middle of this is the perfect moment to say something important. If these kinds of conversations help you think more clearly about money, subscribe to the channel. Not because it is some empty routine, but because channels like this only keep growing when viewers who care about practical financial thinking decide to stay connected. And the more this content spreads, the more people get exposed to ideas that can genuinely improve the way they earn, save, invest, and make decisions. Now, let's go deeper because the real shift at 50,000 is not just that your money can grow faster. It is that your mistakes become more expensive in a different way. Not because each mistake is automatically larger, but because the opportunity cost starts getting real. Spending $5,000 on something forgettable hurts differently when you realize what that $5,000 could have become if added to a growing base. Delaying good decisions no longer feels neutral. It feels measurable. That awareness can create a new kind of anxiety. You may start checking your accounts too often. You may become overly attached to preserving the number. You may feel emotionally shaken by normal market volatility. This is another overlooked part of the journey. Building to 50,000 creates pride, but can also create fragility if your identity becomes too tied to the number itself. That is why mature investors learn a difficult lesson around this stage. Your goal is not to worship the balance. Your goal is to serve the process that created it. If your confidence comes only from seeing the number stay high, you will make emotional decisions when it falls. If your confidence comes from your habits, your plan, your discipline, and your time horizon, you can survive temporary setbacks without mentally collapsing. That is the difference between being rich in behavior and just rich in screenshots. And yes, there will be tests. Because once you reach 50,000, life has a funny way of presenting you with new temptations disguised as reasonable adult choices. Maybe you get approved for more credit. Maybe your income rises and your friend group changes. Maybe your family starts assuming you can afford more. Maybe you feel embarrassed by how modest your lifestyle still looks. These are not always financial decisions in the obvious sense. Many of them are emotional decisions with financial consequences. That is why the $50,000 stage often exposes boundaries. Can you say no without over-explaining? Can you resist social upgrades that do not fit your plan? Can you separate generosity from financial self-erasure? Can you enjoy progress without announcing it? These questions sound personal because they are. Wealth is not built in a vacuum. It is built inside relationships, identities, insecurities, and expectations. Another powerful thing starts happening at 50,000. You begin to respect time in a new way. Not only because of compounding, but because you realize how long it took to build the number in the first place. Maybe it took years. Maybe it took sacrifice nobody saw. When you look at that number honestly, you're not just looking at money. You're looking at concentrated life energy, hours of labor, emotional restraint, repeated choices. And when you truly feel that, you stop treating money like random paper. You start treating it like store time. That mindset alone can transform spending behavior. Because when money feels like stored time, waste becomes more visible. Not all spending waste. There's a difference. Spending on something you value deeply is one thing. Spending because you're tired, insecure, bored, or trying to keep up is something else. At 50,000, that distinction becomes much more important. Every dollar still matters, but now not only because you're trying to survive. It matters because you finally have something worth protecting. Now we get to one of the most important revelations in the entire journey. The real power of $50,000 is not that it makes you rich. It is that it proves you can become the kind of person who builds wealth on purpose. That is the real breakthrough. The money matters, obviously, but the deeper value is identity. You're no longer someone who only talks about wanting stability. You have evidence. You're no longer someone who assumes discipline is for other people. You have proof. You're no longer guessing whether consistent action works. You have lived it, and that is where everything changes. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. Identity is quieter but stronger. When you see yourself as a person who protects margins, who invests regularly, who delays gratification, who thinks long-term, your behavior becomes less dependent on emotion. You no longer need to feel inspired every month. You simply act in alignment with who you have become. And that is the hidden reason why the first 50,000 is often harder than the next 50. Not because the math suddenly becomes easy, but because the internal resistance is lower. You have crossed from hoping to knowing. This is the climax most people miss. The real shift is not in the account. It is in the self-concept. 50,000 changes your life, most when it changes what you believe is normal for you. Before, wealth may have felt like something distant people did. Now it becomes part of your personal reality. Before, saving and investing may have felt like chores. Now, they start feeling like how you live. Before, setbacks may have made you question whether you were built for this. Now, even when you stumble, you know you can rebuild because you already have. And once that identity locks in, a new truth appears. You stop asking, how can I look richer? And start asking, how can I become harder to shake? You stop chasing the emotional high of visible upgrades and start chasing the quiet power of durable systems. You become comfortable with the fact that wealth often grows in boring-looking seasons. And the invisible is where most real financial success is built. At this point, someone might be thinking, okay, but is 50,000 enough to transform everything? No, of course not. It does not erase every problem. It is not magic. But that is exactly why it matters. Because if a relatively modest milestone can already begin changing your stress, your choices, your perspective, and your trajectory, then it proves that progress matters before perfection. You do not need to wait until you're set for life to experience a different relationship with money. The shift starts earlier than people think. And that matters for anyone watching who has not reached this number yet. Because it means the journey is not pointless until some giant finish line. Every phase is training for the next one. The discipline you build at 5,000 matters. The habits you build at 10,000 matter. The consistency you build at 20,000 matters. But 50,000 is often where the payoff becomes emotionally visible enough to change your behavior in a lasting way. For those who are already there, the question becomes simple but serious. What are you going to do with the proof? Are you going to use it as permission to drift, flex, and inflate your lifestyle until the number stagnates? Or are you going to use it as evidence that your system works, your future is buildable, and your next decade can look radically different from your last one? Because that is what this milestone really offers, evidence. The people who use this stage will usually do a few things quietly. They keep their fixed expenses from exploding. They continue raising contributions when income rises. They become selective about what they upgrade. They protect cash for real emergencies and keep long-term money long-term. They avoid turning every financial win into an excuse for immediate consumption. They stop trying to impress people who are not funding their future. So if the number 50,000 has felt random to you before, now you know it is not random at all. It is the threshold where money begins to influence not just your wallet, but your psychology in a measurable way. It is the line where your behavior becomes more decisive than your excitement. It is where the illusion of someday starts getting replaced by the reality of, if I stay consistent, this actually works. It is not the finish line. It is the fork in the road. If this changed the way you see the journey to 50,000, subscribe, keep learning with this channel, and send this video to one person who genuinely needs to hear it before they mistake progress for permission. The next step from here is understanding what happens after this milestone, especially why the jump from 50,000 to 100,000 often feels completely different from the climb that came before it. That conversation can change how you save, invest, and make decisions over the next few years. And if you stay close to this channel, that is exactly the kind of practical financial growth we're going to keep building together.